Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Ozcast.
Okay, Rach, are you ready to go?
Yes.
What are we doing?
I don't know. I thought you knew.
Phil, aren't you supposed to be running the show? Which guest have we got?
Don't make me the boss of stuff.
You're the boss of stuff.
Let's wing it.
And go.
Hi, welcome to the This Is My Voice podcast.
The podcast where we discuss all things voice performance and talk to some of the industry's best and brightest talent.
We're your hosts, Rachel Salas.
And Eddie Bye. Dan Brumm, thank you so much for your time, mate.
Now, we always hear in interviews about voice actors, characters, and the projects, but right now we want to know about you. Let's start at the beginning. You spent your childhood in Cairns. Can you tell us about the early years pre your voiceover and sound engineering career?
Yeah, so I was born in Winton, but grew up in Cairns until I was about 10. With my two older brothers, Adam and Joe, which it was a really lovely little town to grow up in back in the sort of late 80s. Really innocent place, lots of wild places to go exploring and ride your bikes to and stuff, which is, really great little sort of early childhood. Then we moved to Brisbane in 1991 and, I just sort of muddled my way through school and kind of got interested in film and TV. I don't know why exactly. I think I played guitar and I sort of thought, maybe I could do music for things. And so once I graduated, I did a film degree at Griffith University, which is a very generalist degree where you learnt a bit about everything. I didn't quite know what I was trying to do, and I didn't have too much kind of self-direction in any particular field. But then in the third year, there was a sound design subject where you had to stripe sound onto this really weird sci-fi film with this big old Fairlight DAW, this old school Dalek looking thing. And it was really fun because you can elicit responses from people based on how you've decided something sounds and the sound choices you've made. Yeah, I don't know. It's something that was just really fascinating about that, and that kind of piqued my interest a lot. And once I graduated that, I kind of mucked around a bit in Brizzy in share houses and had a bit of fun, and then just eventually kind of started recording myself playing guitar a little bit here and there and getting interested in the process, and went to SAE and did a little bit of course where I learnt a bit about Pro Tools. And then I worked on one of my brother Joe's early animations called Clever Man, which is a great little short film, and it was quite Foley heavy. It needed a lot of sound effects recorded. So I had this crappy little mini disc that I think he'd stolen from someone in India backpacking, and this microphone that somehow plugged into it. And I don't even know what connection this mic must have had to plug into a little mini disc recorder. But I went around town just kind of recording things for this short film. It wouldn't have sounded great. It wasn't a good mic. But what I'm always trying to do with recordings more is just capture the essence of what I'm doing. It doesn't always have to be perfectly recorded. We can go through this later, but with Bluey, I've recorded stuff on my iPhone just because that's all you have at the time, and it's better than not recording this thing. And you can kind of tweak it a little bit to make it fit. And as long as you're sort of just capturing the vibe of what you're trying to show on screen, I think that's the most important thing. That really got me interested in doing the sound design for animations, and I sort of progressed from there and managed to get a lucky job at a radio station at Nova Brisbane when it first opened up, and was kind of the audio shit kicker dude there that was just carting program content into their system. But the guy that hired me, Ben Ryan, is one of the best audio imaging producers in Australia, if not the world. And I got in there paid to do this little sort of monkey job, but he would let me come in anytime I wanted, and he'd just sit there and teach me how to make radio stuff, how to make imaging, how to make commercials. And it's you don't know how lucky you are at the time to be getting essentially paid training from one of the best in the business. I think that gave me a big head start. I didn't realise how lucky I was at the time.
Yeah, he's a dead set legend, and I think there's a whole bunch of those in the industry, that are like that, and they are just a special breed, aren't they?
He is. He shaped the whole sound of Nova Brisbane, this kind of they took the piss out of things, and they were funnier than any other commercial radio station, and they really pushed it as far as they could get away with, given the sort of the branding of a corporate radio station. And he grew up on The Simpsons like I did, so we had a very similar sense of humour. And after about a year, I saw a job at a post house that I'd always wanted to work at come up, and I applied and I got the job. And I sort of sheepishly told him, because he'd just spent a year solidly training me to the point where I was actually kind of be useful to him at a radio station. Then I took all that knowledge and up and left somewhere else. But he wished me well, obviously.
That's amazing. You know what really interests me is that essence of a sound. I sit there and I do the same thing. And, you've got your classic sound effects. You go, if I need a car door or an elevator or something like that, you just go, you've got the one you want. You know that sound, and it just works every time. Even though it probably doesn't really make full sense to pictures. But you go, I need to find that exact sound. And I find, from my point of view, sometimes you go, I wish I could find a better version of that sound. And you go on a bit of a hunt for it, and you go through all your sound effects and all that sort of stuff, and you end up coming back to that original sound 9 times out of 10 and going, no, it just works. There's just something about it, isn't it?
Yeah, it just communicates. The perfect example is a record scratch sound. Like, I swear, there is one record scratch sound from the 6,000 sound effects libraries, classic sound effects library. It's the one sound of a record scratch, and everyone uses it because it's perfect. It communicates exactly the record scratch, and everyone tries to do more realistic ones and stuff, but it's like, that one's perfect because it's a bit hyper real. It does exactly what it needs to do. And you feel kind of guilty using these kind of fairly cliched old sounds. I should really put a more modern one in, but they do. You don't have long in sound. You don't have long to communicate an idea. And so you want the sound choice you've used just has to sell that idea really quickly, particularly with animation.
You have to sort of hit them straight between the eyes. And I guess, I don't do much sound for animation, but if it's a sound that has to be foreground and up front, has to hit them between the ears straight away. You can't kind of go, that one's nearly good enough. Say, for example, you got your record scratch sound effects and you load a whole bunch into your session and you sort of line them up and you go, not quite. But then you go, geez, nearly lunchtime. I think I'll stick with that one and I'll just move on, right? And then you come back and you go, it's not working. And that's the thing. And so I find, I don't know about you, I could probably learn from you, but I spend more time trying to find the right sound than just putting it into the session and, turn the volume up on it. You know what I mean? That takes longer to find the right sound.
Yeah, it does. And sometimes I'll just track a sound quickly. I'll try and find the right sound first. But if you haven't found it, you just sort of put something in, and in the review process, it'll stick out straight away that it's the wrong sound, and you'll go on a hunt from there. But you're right, like it does. It has to hit them straight away. And I think with Bluey particularly, the animation in Bluey, like, I think that's the real brilliance of that show, is it looks like it's fairly simple, the animation, but it's incredibly well done. And the animation is really quick. Like, if say like Dad falls over onto the ground, there's maybe like 2 or 3 frames of that fall. It's not this big sort of fluid, fully animated fall. It's just snappy and punchy. He's here and then he's there. So the sounds have to reflect that. They've got to just hit really hard. You can't just sort of fade into the sound slowly and then have it sort of die out and decay. It's got to be quick and punchy to match this fast action. And that took a bit of adjusting at first. And my brother Joe, who's the director and the creator, he's got a really great idea of how sound should work for animation. So he could really kind of tell you how he wanted your sounds to communicate his story. And you have these big punchy moments in Bluey that have this big transient, and then they just have to die out really quickly. And this is getting pretty nerdy, but the problem with that is sound takes time to evolve its character. And so you want to kind of have this big sort of decaying sound. You want the creaky floorboards and stuff, but that just gets annoying because the show moves so quickly. So you've got to somehow learn to communicate that sound in like 6 frames kind of thing, or even less maybe. You can hit the essence of exactly what you're trying to communicate with no superfluous bits that are going to drag the heels.
Yeah, and slow it down because there's comedic timing that needs to be sort of maintained with all of that stuff. And if you get the timing of the sound wrong, it feels wrong, and it does. It ruins the scene, doesn't it? It makes the scene just stops making sense.
Yeah, it can. And like there's lots of those little sort of staccato moments, like the footsteps in Bluey of the kids. They're not kind of the classic footsteps of like a heel to a toe that has this like kind of crunchy thing, like in a live action film when the Foley guy does it. I sort of designed all these little staccato hits, these little one hits, dum 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 dum, because the kids, you're trying to communicate, the kids just tear around a house and it's like thunderous as they're running sort of thing. And so you line up to the footsteps and you have this specific loop distance, frame sort of distance between the footsteps. So you get this dum 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 dum, which is a real Simpsons thing. They used to do that so well when Homer would run off screen, you know, that you could communicate, even though you weren't seeing him running off screen, that thunderous sort of dum 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 just told you so much about the comedy of how quickly he was running. And so you have a lot of that in Bluey, like those little just staccato sounds that really show you the pace that these kids are running at.
Often followed by a car door slam and then your standard tyre squeal as he speeds off into the distance.
We got to do that a couple of those times in Bluey, like those classic Homer jokes where I'll just go get it upstairs. We got to do that a few times in Bluey, which is a real rare treat for a sound designer, that you solely communicate a joke with your sound design. That's good fun doing that.
Yeah, I love that when it's off scene. So you just go, all right, it's my time to shine here. This is my time to tell the story effectively. We are totally geeking out on sounds here. This is a voiceover podcast. Perhaps, Rachel, do you want to ask some voicey, charactery questions?
Perfect segue. So now tapping into some childhood nostalgia, and you touched a little bit on it. Did you watch a lot of cartoons growing up, and what were your favourite characters?
Astro Boy, like just hands down. Loved Astro Boy. It was just such a weird cartoon, and I was chatting to Joe recently, and I think I had this idea that it really must have motivated the idea behind Bluey a lot, of a show that's for kids, but as well as adults, because like thinking back, Astro Boy was not meant to be a kid's cartoon. It's quite heavy. Like there's an episode where his girlfriend dies and it's really sad. But I think back in the 80s, the programs went, oh, here's a cartoon. Let's put this on at 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning. But us kids, we loved it. Like we got all those sort of much more sophisticated ideas, and we really got caught up in the emotion and the power of the story. So yeah, he was just such a cool character too. Loved that show. I was chatting to Joe the other day because I had this idea that it must have really inspired Bluey, sort of the way that it's a co-viewing show that's written for adults as well as kids. And it's got slightly more heavier concepts in it. Because Astro Boy, like it wasn't a kid's cartoon. It was an adult's show, really. But back in the 80s, the programmers must have just seen an animation, so they put it on 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Us young kids, we loved it, and we could follow the heavier ideas in Astro Boy. Like, you know, there's that episode where his robot girlfriend dies. Like, that's full on for a kid's show, you'd think. But I think kids are sophisticated enough that they can handle these sort of ideas. And I reckon that was a bit of an idea for Joe to sort of write those kind of heavier ideas into a kid's show of Bluey.
It definitely does work. We had Billy West on our show and we were having a chat about one of the Futurama episodes about his dog dying, and I was just bawling my eyes out. I'm like thinking, come on, Rach, this is a cartoon. Calm down. But I love that, how it makes you emotionally invested in the project. Yeah,
it's ever since it released, you kind of, you tell people when you're dropping your kids off at school, you tell people that you work on it, and they want to tell you how much the show means to them and how much they've loved watching it. And I think because it's so sincerely written, like it's the story of someone raising their own kids in a very sort of non-fanciful way, we all see ourselves in the characters, and we've done we've played those games, we've been through those emotional moments, and so it's like your story has been recognized on screen. So I think that's why it resonates with so many people. And I cut these episodes, I cut the sound for these episodes, and I watched them 1,000,000 times doing that, but they still get to you when you watch them. Like there's certain episodes that still kind of just choke me up. Like Bumpy and the Wise Old Wolfhound, like any parent who's had a kid who's been in hospital a few times, like that episode is so beautifully done because it's powerfully emotional, but it's not sappy. It's really, really funny. and the story just moves, and then in a second it just hits you with this kind of little emotional thing. But it doesn't really it's not sappy about it. It just kind of, if you want to think about it, it's there. But if not, you can just enjoy a funny episode.
How did this show become such a phenomenon? Did you think it was going to end up like this?
It's a funny one for me to answer because I've obviously been Joe's brother my entire life, and I've seen from an early age that he's an incredibly talented storyteller and animator. And you always knew that he had this kind of potential in him. I don't know what it was, but you knew that he had these stories and he could communicate them so well. So when he got the green light to make this into a series, you knew that he wasn't going to do a not great job of it. You knew that he was going to put out the best possible show he could. And when we started making season 1, you could tell immediately that, one, this is like way different from any show you've ever seen. So was that a bit of a worry? Was it too different? Like, was it going to resonate? But you trusted your instinct, and you're like, no, this is a really good show. And then eventually when it released, the first half of season 1, and you started noticing that it was resonating with other people. It was a good relief for everybody, but I think we all kind of knew what we were working on had legs. Honestly, you could never tell that it was just going to be as huge as it is now. That's it's an absolute spin out, but sort of deservedly so, because it's so sincere and it's so well told, and it's very, very carefully produced, every single episode.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
I've got this theory of the story comes first. You've got to have the right story, but then it has to be told properly as well. Like when I work with scripts, I look at a script and go, that's a brilliant script. But if I get a rubbish actor who can't bring it to life, then we trip over it at that hurdle. And I think with this show, you've got that great script, but also the great performances as well. And I mean, I truly believe in that. You can have all the gear and no idea. That's what I think we deal with a lot of people in our world with that sort of stuff. They've got the latest everything, but what comes out of it is absolute rubbish because they've forgot that you need a highly creative writer to tell an amazing, engaging story first. And like you said with your iPhone thing, you'd rather get the right sound effect recorded on an iPhone than the wrong sound effect recorded on a blooming $10,000 Neumann microphone, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'd love to have something perfectly recorded, but you make do with the best you have available kind of thing. Like, and as long as, I think that's the key thing. It's like you're trying to tell a story here, and sound is trying to help tell that story. And that's the most important thing. So don't let fidelity get in the way of something that's not going to tell the story as well as a crappily recorded thing with your iPhone.
Yeah, I love it. That's the soundbite right there. Don't let fidelity get in the way. Like you just go, wait a minute, I just need to plug in my Ambisonics microphone to record this. It's like, nah, you've missed it now because you're fluffing about with your equipment.
It had happened. Like I would design some beautiful sound that I've recorded well, and Joe would come and listen and go, oh, it's not quite working here, use this sound. But it's this crappily recorded thing that he's found somewhere, which I'm hesitant to use as a sound designer, but it just communicates exactly what he's trying to convey. So that's what ends up in the final. And it doesn't matter that it's super not high quality or whatever. No one cares really. In the end of the day, the audience, they'll never notice. But what they would notice is if a sound isn't communicating an idea properly.
It conveys the emotion. I've got this saying, particularly in radio, when you do something really good in radio, it's like wetting yourself in a pair of black pants. You get a nice warm feeling, but nobody notices.
Good saying, bit gross, mate.
But it's true, though. That's what it is. You deal with a lot of sound engineers that pop monos. They go, do you know, I can do this amazing, this, that, and the other, and look at this edit, and look at this, and, blah, 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 sound design. And you look at it and you go, from experience, the audience wouldn't notice if you just did something far simpler and took far less time to do it. The audience, they don't care. And my wife's classic for it. She just doesn't care. Like, we'll watch TV and I'm like, oh, something's wrong with the sound. I think it's coming through the TV and not all the speakers in our surround sound. She'd be like, oh, is it? No one cares. But the right sound effect brings the emotion and the audience connects with the emotion.
Yeah, and it's that classic sort of trope that if you've done the sound design right, no one will notice any of your sounds because they just will immerse them in the story. But if you get it one wrong, it's going to pull them out of their world.
Now, we are geeking out on sound again. Rach, I wanted to talk to Dan about obviously transitioning from one side of the glass to the other. How does that journey happen for us?
Yeah, I'll quickly give you a background of sort of how I got into voice acting. Like I'd never considered being an actor in my life. I'd never done any acting school or anything like that. But I was a sound designer at a post-production house cutting commercials. And like my whole life, whenever I meet someone, they go, "Well, you've got a really nice voice," which is like, you didn't know, like, okay, thank you. You didn't quite know how to handle that. But working in a post house, I was recording the best voiceover artists in Brisbane, constantly recording 1 million different ads. And so eventually a client came in one day and he said, "Hey, Brummy, can you record the voiceover for this ad I'm doing? You got a good voice." And so I did, and that ad kind of blew up a bit, and I sort of was like, oh, shit, maybe I could do this for a living. And where I lacked acting experience, I knew how the process works because I've recorded 1 million ads. So you know exactly how an ad needs to sound: fast, slow, retail, corporate, whatever. And you just had to kind of train yourself to physically be able to do that. But you knew everything about the process and you knew how sessions work. And that kind of, all of that information really helps you just concentrate on using your voice better, which eventually after a lot of practice that becomes it just flows like water sometimes.
That doesn't work for everyone. I've got a colleague who sat as an engineer for a long time and went, "I'm going to do voiceovers," and he, much like you, knew the format, knew what to do. He'd worked at one of the top agencies in Australia, and he thought, "I can do this." There's a bit of natural talent there as well, which has to happen. I think you can't just follow the bouncing ball and go, "Well, I know what to do here." Yeah.
Well, I wonder, I don't believe entirely in luck. I think luck begets a lot of the work you put in. I think I put in a lot of work, but I was lucky in that I just had this North Queensland accent, which just sounded a bit more relaxed and kind of like an Aussie bloke. And I came onto the scene at a time when the classic voiceover, "Hello, it's Lyndon Johnson," kind of thing, that trend was sort of dying out, and they wanted more just naturally spoken things. And that's all I could do because I wasn't a voiceover actor, but I could speak normally. And I've got this slightly sort of drawn out kind of North Queensland accent. And I think there was a character to my voice. That's not hard work. That's kind of genetics and luck sort of thing. So yeah, it's hard work, but I think there is circumstances involved as well.
Yeah, in terms of the characters, they are really tough. And, when we speak here today, I don't hear like a super character-rich voice. I hear, like you said, that everyday, regular Queenslander bloke who we trust. If you were to try and sell me a product, I'd probably buy it, right? I think that's a compliment, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that's my bio. That's literally my agent's bio of me. He's like the neighbour leaning over your fence.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that. But how do you go from that to quite specific characters where you need to kind of match what you see in the animation? How do you do that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's all how you use your voice. So when I'm in conversation right now with people or with you guys, I'm sort of talking through my throat. So you're getting that real nasally sort of thing. But people will hire me for an ad. They'll hire me for my natural voice, but this is my natural voice, and it just doesn't really translate to advertising very well. So you've got to speak more from your stomach and get more of the boom, which I'm sort of doing now a little bit more. So you're always kind of putting on a character. Even though you're being yourself, you kind of, and this is Radio Dan, who's a bit more hyped up, or this is serious, dramatic Dan, or... So it's a funny thing. I don't think there's ever, this is my natural voice. This is my lazy, talking through my throat, not using much energy kind of voice, and it sounds pretty North Queensland and nasally, and maybe good for some things, but mostly you want to sort of bring in that warmth and that deep thing by sort of channeling your energy up from your core.
You've got some really good techniques that you've published on your LinkedIn. You've got some interesting recording techniques where you sit down or laying back can impact the style of your read. Can you take us through your experiences experimenting with this?
Yeah, well, I mean, here in Australia, voiceover artists, when you go to a session, the microphone's always at sort of standing height, so you're standing up, and it's really good for sort of high energy retails because I like to flail my arms as I speak to sort of keep me in the vibe of the script. And that's cool, but Look, I don't know the science, by the way, behind this, whether I'm actually correct, but I figure that just really opens your diaphragm up a lot and sort of, your voice sounds a certain way because of it. But I've just noticed that, like, putting my kids to sleep at night, I usually lie down in their beds and I read them a storybook. Look, I'm a voiceover artist, so I like the sound of my own voice, which is counterintuitive to a lot of people. But particularly, I love reading these books because A, I'm tired because it's nighttime, but B, I'm lying down and my voice is all my stomach's a bit bunched up kind of thing. And the voice just comes out effortlessly and it's really kind of quite low and gravelly. And I find it hard to really do that when I'm standing up. So yeah, I mean, and sitting down, if you sit down, I think you're gonna read a script differently. You're gonna read it in a more relaxed way than when you're standing up and you're orating and you're flailing your arms like a madman. I haven't tested all these theories, but that's just a guess.
Well, I mean, like in the UK, they almost always sit down. Whereas here in Australia, like you said, you're almost always standing.
That's what I thought, because I was in London at Capital Radio, and all the voiceover artists would sit down, and it just never consider one. Well, stand up. But yeah, there's probably a reason for that. Well,
because my point of view is you go, well, if you're standing, you can really engage your diaphragm better and all your pipes that the sound comes out of to come out of your mouth are much straighter. And so in theory, standing up would be better. But I do agree with you that it is more, you end up giving a slightly more energetic read because you're supporting your own weight on your feet, right? To get super technical. Whereas when you're sitting down, you can still have quite good posture from the hips up. But it's far more relaxed. And, honestly, when I just read scripts at home, I'm always sitting down because I just sit in front of my laptop and just voice it and off I go. Whereas you can walk into a studio and you're standing up. And I've got a voice booth in here and every now and then I'll go and use the good mic for this because it's a big job or whatever. And I'm not as comfortable standing in my own personal voice booth as I am just sitting at my desk just knocking out the script.
It is fun. Yeah, it is weird. Most of my voiceovers I do from home. I do stand up, but like I did a documentary series recently for the Snowy Mountain Hydro, which was more of a formal voiceover and a bit more narrating and not quite as big a voice as some of the other stuff I do. And so I did. I sat down for the whole thing. And you can still project energy a little bit or a bit of a sort of smile to your voice, but I just think it kind of, in your brain, it just calms you down a bit so you get out of that kind of retail voiceover mode and because I'm sitting down now and so you know what I mean, your energy sort of drops a little, which can be good for certain styles of voiceover reads.
I was going to ask you, how do you make Uncle Stripe's personality come to life?
The scripts are so good in Bluey that like your lines are just always funny. They're always great fun, and particularly Stripe, like I love him as a character because he's pretty full on. He's pretty high energy with a lot of his stuff. And I sort of learned through being the sound designer for animation and doing little incidental kind of voices like screams of characters or maniacal laughs that if you don't give 110% and really scream, it just doesn't translate well. So that was kind of helpful with Stripe because like an episode like Stumpfest where he walks in, he's like, Stumpfest! It's like if you do that sort of half-assed, it kind of, you don't sell how pumped he is about cutting some trees down with an axe. So you kind of, luckily years of voiceover acting just means your inhibitions go. As soon as you're in that little glass prism, that's like your safe space to be whoever you need to be. Yeah, you just let go and you just do things as loudly as possible. And he's got he yells a lot, Stripe. If you go through the episodes, there's a lot of just passionate screaming, yelling, basically.
He's so high energy, so you can't really hold back at all. And I think a lot of people, when they're in the booths, they're like, I don't want to make a goose out of myself. Or you can't really hold back with those things, and you've just got to really go for it and just be a big kid. So it sounds like
it's just funnier big. If you do. Like when you really go for it, it ends up being funnier and just works better on animation. But yeah, Stripe, I try and make Stripe just as close to just me as possible in terms of the way I use my voice. I think through all my radio training, you can sort of bring a lot of sort of the bass out in your voice. And that just, it sounds a bit too rich. So I try and just talk as sort of nasally as possible and just as North Queensland as possible and, raise the energy levels here and there because you're talking to kids as well. So I find when you're talking to young kids, your energy rises anyway. How you going? Because you're trying to encourage them to have a good time. So you try and bring that out in the voice as much as possible.
Now you've had terrific success with voicing characters. What's your dream voiceover gig?
That's a great question. I actually really I've started recently narrating documentaries, and that's a lot of fun. I've just finished my 3rd season of Gem Hunters Down Under, which is one of those classic sort of obdocs where they go out and follow a bunch of people that are trying to dig up sapphires in central Queensland. 2 seasons in, the director said something really interesting. He said, "You're the 5th character in this show," is the narrator. I never really considered it like that the voice of the narrator really helps shape the show, and it's kind of an important part of how the story's told. And the narrator in Gem Hunters is like just beefed up kind of Bogan Dan sort of thing. And it's just so much fun because you can just be a bit over the top and beefy, but then those documentaries, bad luck happens to the characters, and so there's some scenes where you really sort of go into a more intimate, dramatic kind of voice, and it changes in a second. Like the luck will change on screen, so you've just got to flip into this more happy voice. And I don't know, I love documentaries, and so to be able to voice them, it's a really fun process.
I've never really voiced anything like that myself, and I go, I'd love to do it as well. But I feel like it would be really challenging. I mean, you're seeing the pictures as you're narrating, aren't you? Or are you just reading a script?
No, well, some you do. Some you just read a script. But with Gem Hunters, it's all edited. The music's there. Maybe it's guide music, but there's sound effects as well, usually being sort of cut in by the editor. So there's a lot of cues. So the music really informs. They'll hit record and it's, oh, cool, it's happy music. So this is happy Dan. And then suddenly a minor key strikes. Oh, wait, quick, go into dramatic mode and you change gears quickly. And it's tricky, you have to kind of really be thinking on your feet and reading ahead and knowing where the paragraph is going and stuff. But yeah, it's fun. It's fun. It's hours at a time too.
Yeah, I bet. What is it, about 4 hours a session, something like that?
Yeah, and fatigue starts coming in with your voice. Like if you've done longer voice sessions, after all, your voice gets a bit scratchy, especially if it's a big boomy voice. Your voice does get a bit scratchy, and my head starts to spin out, because you're just reading these texts and you're in this weird sort of air-conditioned room and you're interacting with clients and you start just kind of falling in and out of the zone of it a little bit.
And they pick you up on that, though you'll get told off and you got to do it again, I suppose.
Yeah, that's right. But look, to backpedal, dream jobs, yeah, I love doing documentaries, but I'm well aware that I get to voice a character in the biggest children's show in the world, if not the biggest show in the world. So, to say that isn't my dream job is a bit crazy. Voicing Stripe is just, honestly, it's an absolute honour to voice a character in that show, and it still spins me out that I do.
Now, you're a parent to 3 kiddos. Is voicing a role on a beloved children's show more rewarding when you can share it with your children?
Yeah, it's funny. They sort of don't get it. Every now and then at school, someone will go, hey, to their little kid, hey, this is the voice of Uncle Stripe in Bluey. It's this amazing thing, and the kid just looks at you like, I thought Uncle Stripe was a dog. They don't understand the adult concept of voicing a character, and then it's a thing. But yeah, I mean, except for my youngest, who kind of wasn't born yet when we were making the show, the whole process of making Bluey, I always really involved my young daughters in the making of it and the recording of all the sounds and stuff, and they would visit me in the studio when we're doing voiceovers. And so to me, the show, it's almost like a time capsule of my own parenting journey. When I look back at the early episodes, I sort of remember where I was and that my girls visited me that day, or they helped me record those sounds, or... Yeah, and I don't know, I think they probably do think it's a pretty cool job.
I used to voice ads for a popular fast food pasta restaurant, and my kids were really young and they would hear the ads on the radio and stuff like that, and they swore that I worked at this place. They go, Dad, did you know I used to think you worked there? I'm like, no, I didn't. And it's funny because kids have got this great imagination, and that's my sort of, loose claim to fame, but the kids have just got to, surely, if it was my kids, their mind would be blown by that. They're not doing an ad for some dodgy pasta joint, it's totally different.
It's pretty funny because doing the sound for the show, since COVID, I did a lot of it from home because we sort of had to. And so I'll be working in my room on a Bluey episode, and my kids will come in and they'll ask me questions. I'm like, kids, go away, I'm working. And they'll look at me going, no, you're just watching Bluey episodes. Because they don't quite understand. It's like, no, this is work. And they're like, yeah, but can we watch the Bluey episode too?
Only if you want to watch the same scene over and over again for 45 minutes straight.
And not any of the dialogue or music, just the sound effects of it.
Have you taken inspiration as a parent and applied it to your performance as Uncle Stripe?
Yeah, look, absolutely. This is why Bluey is so successful, because it's written by a dad who has played all those games. Like, a lot of those games probably happen in real life and then got translated into script. So that's how we are as dads these days, and mums. Like, we play all these games and we're all high energy, and seeing it on screen like that, it's great. And when you're doing the voice acting, you just try and get back into that zone, and you've had countless hours of playing these games at home with the kids, so you can sort of draw back on all of that. And then, like an episode like Facey Talk, where Stripe's trying to get Muffin off the iPad. It's like, my eldest child is very Muffin-like in terms of she's very high-spirited. So, like, I've said it in a couple of podcasts, like, that episode was almost method acting, wildly chasing a kid around a house on a Saturday morning to get her off the iPad sort of thing, and Muffin, turn that off now. So yeah, you do. You basically just put yourself into silly dad mode, and you try and kind of have that energy and that vibe to you, which is a really, it's a tiring mode to be in when you're doing it for real life, but it's a really lovely mode as well. We've been very fortunate, I think, with all the actors that the directors have chosen for this show. They've just brought the show to life, in my opinion.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Recently, you had the honour of voicing fearless leader Police Chief Furbank in the film Combat Wombat 2. You mentioned you had a lot of fun voicing that character. What was the highlight for you?
Look, they're just such cool people to work with, the Cosmic Dino and Like a Photon guys, Ryan and Tanya and Ricard, and I recorded in at Folklore, where I do a lot of my work there, and my studio's there, and we're all great mates. So it's like, you just, in Brisbane here, it's such a good, tight-knit community, and so those voice recording sessions, you're just hanging out in a room full of your mates, and so it makes it a fun thing. Like, it wasn't even in a booth for that. We're all in the same room with a mic in the corner kind of thing. So it's really interactive, and they would feed you the lines, and then you would sort of give a few of your versions of them. Then they might sort of workshop it a little bit. And he was a funny character because he was kind of myself, and he was a bit serious, but he was also way over the top and a bit crazy. And so you could really just have as much fun with it as you wanted. But yeah, I mean, look, if every job was like that, where you're just basically working with really good friends, then it'd be a pretty lovely old life.
You're getting some really great opportunities for voiceover work. It's something you should be really proud of.
Yeah, I am. I do. I'm really grateful of the of the career I've had so far. I've certainly worked hard for it, but there's also just been moments of good timing and great placement and all of that kind of thing. But yeah, my commercial voiceover career has been really successful so far, and I've loved every single ad that I've ever recorded. Every time I get booked for a job, like...
Come on, Dan. You just talked about the best experiences. There's got to be, because we've all had a few disasters. Any disasters come to mind where you just walked out of the session and went, oh, that didn't go well?
Off the top of my head, I'm sure there has been. There's been a few sessions where you're like, Jesus, I don't know, I just couldn't hit that brief kind of thing. But either they use your ad or they didn't in the end. But I don't know, like every single time I've walked out of a session at a studio somewhere, it's like, man, I can't believe I get paid to do this. It's so great, like, because I wasn't an actor before. I am now. But it's like, that's lovely. They've chosen me to represent their brand that they've poured their heart and soul and financial savings, and for some reason they've chosen a dude who grew up in North Queensland to represent that brand. So you take that with a certain weight and seriousness, and you try and do the best job as you can.
I love that attitude, and I think I teach voiceovers to young people or just anyone who's just wanting to start out. And you know, I sit in a boardroom, and I've got like 10, 12 people all standing around waiting to become amazing voiceover artists, and you can sort of tell by the temperament of the people who are wanting to play and enjoying the journey of becoming a voiceover artist. They're the ones that I know are going to make it. Like, it's a long and winding path, as you know, right? But they're the ones you know are going to continue it because they're actually enjoying the process. And then you'll often, not often, but every now and then you'll get someone sitting there and they're just like, when do I get my first check? Oh, dude, well, there's a lot of practice involved. He's like, yeah, but voiceover artists make heaps of money, so that's why I'm here to do the course. And I'm like, okay, well, and I can just tell with that mindset, they don't make it. They give up really fast because it's bloody hard, right? You've been through the entire process. Unless you love what you're doing, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I agree. It's incredibly hard to start off. I don't know how people do it now when there's such a huge sort of emphasis on the gig economy and that kind of thing. It was a bit different when I started. The bottom had fallen out of the market when I started because the GFC had just happened, and you know, the massive voiceover party had come to an end, but there was still more just, like I've luckily been able to just maintain my status as a rate card voiceover artist, which is very fortunate. But yeah, I wouldn't wish this career on anyone, really. Like, I love that I'm doing it.
No, that's the other thing. It's like all of us voiceovers are like, oh, you want to do voiceovers? Yeah, that's very, good on you. Well done with that. And if I can be of any assistance, I will. Anyway, I've got to go by. That's pretty much what everybody says, isn't it?
Well, yeah, pretty much. And there's a lot of people trying to get into it. But it's brutal because, like, you'll get maybe one booking a week and you won't know about that until maybe the day before. So you're like Sunday night going, fuck, I've got no work booked for this entire week. And then things land sometimes. Sometimes you go a couple of weeks. Sometimes you get a big job that sort of might cover some time. Yeah, I remember Todd Levi, way back when I started, he said, after about 20 years, you get used to the anxiety. You're constantly sort of on edge about where your next job is going to come from. And it's with advertising particularly, it's so instantaneous that you've got to be available at the drop of a hat's notice, and you've got to be reactive. And like, I've literally been driving to a studio for a job that's been booked for 2 weeks, and it might have been your only job for that 2 weeks, and you've been driving there and you're on the road of that studio, and you'll get a call from your agent going, oh no, they've just contacted us, said the scripts aren't ready, and the session's going to happen some other time. And what do? You say, okay, yep, no worries. And it either, the session will be rebooked, or maybe they move in a different direction and you don't even get that job. So you've had your hopes kind of built up, I've got this big job coming on, and then it's just like, nope, let's see if that, falls back on your radar.
Well, one of my biggest jobs quite a few years ago now, I got it because they'd actually cycled through a whole bunch of dudes that they didn't like. My agent rang me and said, can you be at the studio in like 30 minutes? Because literally they've gone through 4 males and they don't like any of them. And I've gone, yeah, of course, I'll be there. And that turned out to be a highly lucrative job. And my agent kept saying, man, that's really good. You don't want to lose that job. And I had it for about a year. And obviously they move on. They went to a female after me, which is fine. And they're like, oh, I'm so sad that you lost that job. I said, do you know what? I was actually really grateful to have it in the first place. And my theory is like, make hay while the sun shines with that stuff. Take what you can get when you can get it, because it is such a fickle industry, and I cast all day, every day, right? So I'll go, damn, Brumm, yeah, no, I'm a bit done with him. I'm going to go with someone else. And that's it. And I've just moved on. And you know what? That's that whole don't call us, we'll
I'm
call
really
you.
good, man. Use me.
I will, don't worry, mate. I'll book you. Don't worry. I'll get you a job.
Can I tell you, as a sound designer and a voiceover artist, I had this one retail client for quite a while, and it was very lucrative. And I was the sound engineer at the post house where I was recording it, so I'd record myself, and it was this great sort of ongoing thing. And then the client decided to change voiceover artists, and I was the sound engineer, so I had to record those voiceover artists that were going to replace me, which literally was a kick in the teeth You know, like some guy, he doesn't know. He just walks in, does the read. Like, yeah, let's use this guy. And I'm like, I'm recording him.
But it's the way it works. You know, like I know, like I've just booked a voiceover artist for this afternoon. You would know him. I won't name his name, but he is easily one of the top 5 males in Australia. And I booked him this morning for a job and I haven't used him for a while. And he said, oh, no, he's clear all day. And that is code speak for agents. That is code speak for agents saying he's pretty quiet at the moment. And it's kind of the way it is, unfortunately, you know.
Yeah. It's quiet this time of year. It can be scary quiet.
You've got a real well-rounded sort of work base now anyway, so you've got lots of things to keep you going, really.
Yeah, I mean, all the long-form series work can kind of, like when a Bluey season's happening, that's just intense for a year and a half kind of thing. And I work on other shows now as well, so you can kind of, there's always a bit of sound design work and a lot of sound design work that'll help keep things ticking along. And then when a voiceover comes, you're next to a microphone. So that it's quite they're two very symbiotic fields. So, I mean, as you would know, that's the main thing with voiceovers. You have to be available at the drop of a hat's notice. So luckily, when I'm working in a studio with Source Connect and all these things, you are. Any time of the day, you're there straight away.
Because if you're not, someone else who's probably not as good as you is.
Yeah, well, that's it. Like that's it. It's often it's not who's the best voiceover. It's who's available right now that can punch this thing out.
One of the things I really love about Bluey is more people across the world are getting used to our accent and our slang, because many Americans find the Australian dialect a bit jarring, but Bluey is the second most streamed show in the US during 2023, which is amazing. So Bluey is definitely helping make Americans more accustomed to our Aussie accents.
I remember as we started the show, someone saying that Americans are quite fascinated with Australian culture at the moment. And I think Bluey has really sort of helped that out a lot. But yeah, it's great. Like, you get to say Dunny in a TV show that's an international treasure. Like, that's awesome. Or in Stumpfest, when I rip the stump out, I do a big Queenslander. It's like, that's awesome. Getting to put in just something as location specific, and just probably anyone else in the world is watching that going, what the hell is that dude yelling? But I think that's what Joe has tried to really do in this show, is just keep it as sincere to Brisbane and Australia as possible. And language is a big part of that.
It's fantastic representation to Queensland and Australian culture for the rest of the world.
Well, honestly, I think that's the reason the show resonates so much, because anyone who watches it can tell this is just sincerely written. It's not trying to be something that it's not. It's not trying to be fanciful. It's just really sincere. And the language choice and the word choice really adds to all of that. And I think just every single layer of this show, the art, the writing, the music, everything is just trying to be as just beautiful and sincere as possible.
So the success of Bluey is crazy. Like, you've had a Macy's Day Parade balloon and a video game. What part of this success have you most been proud of, and what's the most meaningful to you?
Do you know what? I was driving through Paddington. I don't know if you guys know Brizzy, but the show's sort of loosely set. The healers live in kind of Red Hill, Paddington. And it's a really beautiful suburb of Brisbane, very hilly, and there's these lovely old workers' cottages, and, spent a lot of your kind of 20s partying and share houses and stuff around the place. And I was driving through to pick up one of my kids from dancing or something. I was driving through Latrobe Terrace, and it was sundown, which is over the sort of the mountain, Mount Cootha just off to your right. And it's just, I was driving through going, it's the most beautiful suburb, because the sunlight hits it and the beautiful coloured houses. And I just thought, I'm really proud that the artists in Bluey have just represented this lovely suburb, and so well, so sort of stylistically and so beautifully, and that is then gone out to the rest of the world. Because it really is, Brisbane kind of doesn't get the same attention as Melbourne and Sydney, and it's such a beautiful city, and it's so picturesque, and we're so lucky to be able to live so close to the city centre, and yet in these beautiful old Queenslander houses and lovely sort of hilly green suburbs like Paddington and the Gap.
The artwork is just stunning. I can definitely hear that you've got organic sounds of Queensland for your sound design, like the birds sound Australian.
Yeah. I mean, that's something I try and do. I try and record a lot of suburbia where I live, and I'll go down to the sort of the reservoir and record more bushy scenes there. And I do use libraries from Sydney or Melbourne of their sort of bird sounds and stuff and put it in. But we live in a really beautiful country, and particularly Brisbane. The suburbs here are so beautiful, and the bird life is just lovely. And I like that anyone who's watching this show from somewhere else in the world, I want to give them an impression of what it's like to be in a backyard in the suburbs of Brisbane. And hopefully they think it's quite a nice sounding place.
You get to really work with some interesting voiceover guests for the show. The new season was announced, and joining the cast would be Rove McManus, Deborah Mailman, and Joel Edgerton.
Yeah, I don't even know half of the sort of celebrity casts that have been cast. I'll just be cutting an episode and there'll be a voice, and I'll find out later that it was Eva Mendes, or I knew Natalie Portman, but Lin-Manuel Miranda, I didn't quite know who that was because I haven't recorded them. So yeah, it does. It spins you out that you've suddenly got all these big names in the show.
Where are they recording? Are they recording remotely or?
Yeah, I believe Natalie Portman might have been filming in Australia at the time. So she was down in Byron. So I think Rach or Joe would have directed her over the phone, I think. And Eva Mendes was over in LA in her home, I believe. And yeah, I mean, Lin-Manuel, like, that was so awesome having him on the show. I think he was just such a big fan of the show that they reached out, and he was like absolutely stoked to do it. And yeah, like it does, it spins you out that this show that, you know, started small and has grown, like it really can spin you out to be suddenly cutting in Natalie Portman's voice to this show, or or Lin-Manuel Miranda's kind of thing. Yeah, it's awesome.
Now, to end this podcast, we've got a challenge for you, Dan. You know the whole Inner World voice trailer? Inner World, one man. Well, we want you to make your own and do one for this interview.
And go.
Oh, Jesus, that's putting me on the spot. In a world where this podcast ended very quickly.
Love it.
Short and sweet.
I'm not an in-the-spot actor. Someone gives me a script and I read what they've written for me that's carefully planned. Yeah, don't ask me to improv.
Well, you did a brilliant job, so thank you very much for that, Dan. And best wishes for the future
worries.
of
Feel
Bluey.
free to edit that part out
Dan.
if you'd like.
Dan Brumm, thank you so much for your time, mate.
Yeah, no worries at all. It's been a pleasure.
You're an awesome human, and I'll keep my promise. I'll book you for a job.
Sounds good, mate.
Thank you for listening to This Is My Voice, the podcast about all things voice performance with the world's best voice artists. If you like what you heard, feel free to leave a review and don't forget to subscribe. This episode has been brought to you by the Australian Radio School and delivered to your ears by the Ozcast Network.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.